Hello and welcome to another episode of the Wolverine Show on our YouTube channel and at thewolverine.com. I'm your host today, Anthony Broom, and we have a packed episode in this edition. I'm joined today by On3 Director of Scouting and Rankings, Charles Power, to discuss the Michigan football quarterback battle, some of its future fixtures at the position, I should say, in Jaden Davis and Carter Smith, and a couple other things we want to hit on as well. But before we get into that, I want to let you guys know we are brought to you today by the WolverineOnDemand.com, where you can order your copy of our commemorative national title edition of our magazine in both soft and hardcover editions, as well as get your pre-orders in for our football preview magazine, which is well into production now. I've been cranking stuff out. The whole staff has all week. It will mail out sometime in July. So there's going to be a cover reveal soon. We're really looking forward to that. So get your copies of both over at the WolverineOnDemand.com. Another housekeeping note before we get into the interview, just a reminder that viewers of this show can get 2 months of premium access to the Wolverine.com and the On3 Network's insider content for $1 using the promo code UM1. That's UM1 for your first 2 months of access for $1 at the Wolverine.com. And the info for that, for all the things we just discussed, are in the description below. So now we welcome in Charles Power to the show. He is On3's Director of Scouting and Rankings. We want to pick his brain a bit, especially at quarterback with what Michigan has in Ann Arbor and a few other topics. So welcome in, Charles.
Thanks. Hey, I'm glad to be here.
I want to start with this. We'll talk about quarterbacks and things like that in a second. But, when it comes to scouting, when it comes to putting recruiting rankings together, there's almost like this kind of Wizard of Oz, man behind the curtain mystique about how all that comes together. And we don't want you to spoil any industry secrets or anything like that, but can you tell our audience maybe a little bit more about what you do and what your process is like in evaluating guys?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's a great way to frame it. I mean, we try to operate with a very process oriented approach. Our kind of the way we put it together is pretty meticulous. And I think that the basis for our rankings is we go position by position first. So our biggest task is really stacking each position kind of in order, how we see it. And that's projecting towards the NFL draft, kind of a long-term potential type of projection. And this is one that really our goal is to project them as college football players, which we measure by the NFL draft. I think that's generally our best kind of barometer for how these guys play in college. You look at the best college teams, they have very high draft pick totals. Michigan last year, great example of that. So I think that's our barometer. That's kind of our North Star for putting these rankings together. It's projecting college impact via the NFL draft, and we start position by position, and we take in a ton of factors. There's not one thing. We always start our evals kind of film first and build it out, but there's so many predictive factors, and it really depends position by position, but athleticism, production, size and frame, physical growth potential. So we work on that really year round. We're doing at least 2 cycles kind of concurrently, sometimes 3, depending on what time of year it is. If it's in the fall, we're really working on 3. So that's kind of how we put it together. And we take in kind of a vast array of input within our network, and just try to kind of have as much of a collaborative and fair process as possible.
Awesome. Well, I want to move into Michigan's current quarterback battle. Now, Michigan moves on from a guy, J.J. McCarthy, who I assume when you evaluate guys like that, who are these fringe type of 5-star, high 4-star type of guys, that's a lot easier of an evaluation to do than maybe when you have a battle full of guys who, one guy, Davis Warren, was a former walk-on. Jack Tuttle has been in college for 7 years. Alex Orji, I think, was a 3-star guy, but came out of high school as an athlete. And we didn't really know what he was going to be. So, in terms of this Michigan football quarterback battle, and maybe more so even honing in on Alex Orji, what do you make of the guys in that room and some of the evaluations you did on them in the past?
Yeah, it's an interesting group, like you said. I think starting off with Orji, I had to go back and check because it's been several years. We had him as a 4-star athlete, and I think part of that was, we felt really good about the physical ability. I mean, as Michigan fans know, he's got kind of a great combination of size and athleticism. I think he's like 6'2", 220 coming out. And you go back and watch him on film and just watch him in the camp setting back then, and he wasn't, skimping in the weight room in high school. So you can kind of, he's continued to only get better in that regard at Michigan. So I think he's a physical specimen in that regard, but he got better and better as his high school career went on. As a senior, he was a 2,000-yard passer, 1,000-yard rusher. And I think, looking at him as a quarterback prospect, 'cause we were really kind of viewing him as an athlete at the time. Because like you said, I think everybody was kind of like trying to kind of figure out what he was. But I think when you look at him as a quarterback, if you have a offense that's really tailored to his strengths, I think he's a potential X factor. So I think, just watching him continue to improve as a senior at Sac City in Texas, I think that was very encouraging. And that was part of why we went with him as a 4-star, along with just the physical ability. And I think when you look at how he potentially fits into Michigan's offense and kind of the way the team is constructed, how he complements their personnel packages, how he complements Donovan Edwards in the backfield, and then just the favorable box numbers he can dictate. I think it's not a stretch to say a guy like him, just with his skill set, kind of makes him a little bit different than the rest of the guys in the room. So, going back and watching him, I think just in high school and then kind of seeing what he was able to do this year, I think he kind of fits the kind of ball that Michigan wants to play, and really how their roster is constructed, with really kind of being a right now kind of a line of scrimmage, heavy personnel type of roster with their tight end room, how they can run the ball. And I think as they continue to add skill pieces, receivers, I think that looks to kind of be a point of emphasis for Michigan on the recruiting trail. But I think when you look at this team in 2024, I think Orji's skill set really matches up well with kind of what they need.
A lot of fans, when they talk about Alex Orji, you saw a guy that Michigan fans are hoping he could be when they played the Rose Bowl last year against Jalen Milroe. I guess, what are the similarities? What are the differences between those two types of guys?
Yeah, I think that's if you're a Michigan fan, that's kind of what you're hoping for here. And I had written down my notes. Like, I think Jalen Milroe is really that. I think that's a great example. And I think the similarity between those two is they're not, at like complete one-to-one comparisons. But I think Milroe was probably a little further along as a passer at the same stage as Orji, but not worlds apart. They're on the similar spectrum. But I think when you look at their rushing ability, raises the floor and will allow them to get on the field and play efficiently, play behind a great defense, which I think Michigan certainly has. And so Michigan's not going to be in a lot of situations where they're going to have to score fast. Like this, kind of like Alabama, they weren't always going to have to score fast. So if you tailor the offense to his strengths early on and let him get his feet wet, just in terms of experience, in-game experience, I think you could see a similar growth path like you saw with Milroe. Once Alabama kind of tweaked their offense to really fit Milroe's skill set, kind of coming out of that USF game last year, you saw him get better and better as the season went on. So I think if you're a Michigan fan, that would be the hope for Orji if he gets the nod.
We'll talk about the future at the quarterback position really quick. Of course, we are joined by Charles Power. He's On3's director of scouting and rankings. Jaden Davis, he's a guy that, I think if he was a little more college ready, that maybe would factor a little more seriously into this quarterback battle that Michigan's going to wage. But I think the staff has said they feel like he's kind of an amalgamation of all the guys they have in the room. Going back to his recruiting ranking, I know On3's industry ranking had him as 4-star recruit, number 106 overall player, number 8 quarterback in the country. What do you make of Jaden Davis coming out of high school and how he fits with this Michigan offense?
Yeah, Jaden Davis is a guy that we've known about for a long time. I think he first came on my radar, 8th or 9th grade. So been tracking him for a very long time. I think for starters, he's a really good distributor of the ball. His productive passer, put up some gaudy numbers in high school, particularly his last 2 years. Once he transferred to Providence Day, could really air it out and get the ball in playmakers' hands. So I think just from a pure kind of drop back, pocket passing perspective, he's very accomplished in that regard. And I think his skills are kind of accentuated with a good supporting cast, with the receivers to get the ball to in the perimeter. And I think he is probably kind of best at just working as a distributor. I think he's very smart, understands concepts. So I think he's going to come in. He's coming into Michigan with a pretty high level of polish relative to the coaching he's received, the kind of offense he's played in. And just pretty battle tested. I think there's not going to be as much of a developmental curve for Jaden Davis relative to a lot of the signees that they brought in kind of prior to him. So I think he's a little different in that regard. So that would be kind of how I would frame him within the Michigan quarterback group. And I think it'll be interesting to kind of see how the offense, I think, evolves relative to the talent they're bringing in and like the style, because Jaden Davis is a very like different style than like an Alex Orji. So I think they have a good mix of kind of variety in that room as well. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that shakes out. But I think I really view him as more of a he's definitely a pass first guy. So it could be complemented by a run game, but that's going to really be not something that he's going to shoulder. He's going to really be more of, just kind of the distributor type of quarterback.
Is there a successful guy that you've scouted recently that he kind of reminds you of?
The comparison that, EJ and I had for him was kind of a Shea Patterson type. I think, I think the interesting thing with Jaden Davis that I think is going to probably play a role in kind of determining his ceiling is to what level is he going to be able to improvise and make plays with his legs. It's more of an unknown than something to where we can say definitively if that's something that's kind of in his wheelhouse or not, because he just didn't run a ton in high school, but also didn't really have to. He had a great receiving core, great offensive line, so he could kind of sit back and pick apart defenses. So I think it's hard to anticipate things always being that favorable in college. When you get when you're playing in the Big Ten, you're playing against great defenses, you're gonna have to kind of make plays. So I think that's going to be the biggest factor. But I kind of view I think Shea Patterson has kind of been my working comp, just coming out of high school.
Well, I want to move to, normally this is a team-centric show, but I want to hit the recruiting trail a little bit and talk about Carter Smith. He's their commit for 2025. And it seems like every time that EJ has gone out and seen him, different takeaway. He's a little bit better at something. What's your evaluation of Carter Smith and the type of prospect he is?
Yeah, I like Carter Smith a good bit. He's a guy that, coming out of his sophomore year, really caught our attention. He has a background as a top baseball player. So he was, I think right when I first scouted him, I think he was a top 2 or 3 baseball prospect in Florida. So, he's kind of got that natural athleticism. I think from a skill set perspective, will probably remind Michigan fans a little bit of JJ McCarthy. I wouldn't say he has quite the top shelf arm talent of JJ, but in terms of how he attacks the defense, pretty similar. He's well-rounded, a good arm, can throw, but can really move as well. So I think he provides a pretty well-rounded skill set. And as to bring it back to his baseball background, I think into kind of what your point with EJ, seeing him and him getting better and better, I think as he continues to focus on football, you're going to see that improvement. And I think looking back at his Elite 11 workout this spring, you could see improvement just with him tightening up his throwing motion. So I think it's encouraging to anytime in general, but also in this case, when you see a prospect kind of make strides as their high school career goes on and on, you really kind of want to bet on ascending prospects. So I think that's certainly a positive for Carter Smith. I'm excited to see how he looks as a senior. In terms of our evaluation process, we really put emphasis on how these guys play as seniors, I think especially at quarterback. So I think he's showing some positive signs just of improvement. And I think when you look at how he fits in Michigan's offense, I think he does. It's easy to see why both sides are attracted to each other in the recruiting process, because I think he does a lot of the things that the Michigan staff and kind of how it likes in their quarterback. And I think he fits into the scheme really well.
Well, I want to move back to the 2024 class for a second on the offensive side of the ball. We've talked about Jaden Davis, but in terms of the guys that they did sign in that cycle, Is there an under the radar guy? Is there someone with a superlative trait that sticks out? Who are some of your favorite guys that they signed on the offensive side of the ball?
Yeah, I think I would have to start on offense. With Jordan Marshall. I think he's kind of a classic Michigan running back. This guy who is very well rounded, kind of does everything well. He's tough. He's a downhill runner. Has speed, improved his speed, particularly like in his last year or so of high school football. Catches the ball well. He was a big recruiting win for Michigan, out of the state of Ohio. So I would start with him. I think along the offensive line as well. I think Andrew Sprague is an interesting prospect, a guy who's a kind of a very tall, high cut basketball player, very good feet. I think he's kind of reminds me of the type of offensive lineman Michigan's brought in under Sharon Moore. I think he might need a year or two to kind of continue to get bigger and stronger just from a functional standpoint. But got to see him in person in January, and I was, I came away pretty impressed. And I think he, as a developmental type of offensive lineman, fits what they like there. And then Blake Frazier as well. Michigan legacy, a guy who, a very good athlete. He's going to need to continue to put on weight, but has kind of the functional strength, movement skills that you want to see. So those would be the three that kind of stuck out to me on offense, and I really like their haul on defense as well.
On that defensive side of the ball, I mean, is there a guy? Give me a couple guys that stand out to you on that side.
Yeah, I think you have to start off with Lugard Idokpai. We ended up having him, I think, a good bit higher than the industry. He was a personal favorite of mine, and I think his upside, really could be as high as about any pass rusher, in the cycle. He's a guy who's relatively new to football, kind of a tall, long limb basketball player, but I think just the combination of physical skills, his athleticism, first step quickness, and the ability to play strong despite, his relatively kind of thin frame right now. I think it bodes really well. So I think this is the type that Michigan fans, we've seen these pass rushers that the staff has brought in. They'll sit for a couple years and then have a year where they just blow up and become a high draft pick. I think Lugard Idokpai is kind of cut from that same cloth. So just from a pure upside perspective, I think he was the top prospect that Michigan signed last year. And is one that I would be really excited. I'm very excited to kind of see how he progresses over the next couple of years. I'm not necessarily sure that I would expect him to come in and, make a massive impact early on, but give him, a year or two in the strength program and just developing. And I think he has a very high upside. Another personal favorite of mine is Cole Sullivan, the linebacker that they signed out of Western Pennsylvania. I just love the player. Just watching his film it was a joy. He has outstanding instincts. Just a pure football player, a guy who made plays in all three phases at the high school level. Also a basketball player, just a guy who's just kind of a natural, just sees the game really quickly, runs well, physical. So kind of everything you want as a linebacker. Just needs to continue getting bigger. So I think Michigan, when you look at how they've evaluated, they're kind of taking, guys who are, I think have, pretty high developmental ceilings that they just kind of need to continue filling out. And it's kind of a bet on Michigan's developmental apparatus, which I think you could argue is the best in college football, given how they've developed and grown players physically and from a skill set perspective. So those are two. And then I would also add Josiah Edmond. I got to see him in person at the All-American Bowl in January. And I think just in terms of the physical ability, the athleticism, the ball skills, he's a two-way player in high school. So I think that bodes well for his ball skills, at corner. And I think once he focuses on corner full time and kind of hones the technique, he has a high upside as well. So I like Michigan's defensive haul a good bit, and I think they're making bets on their ability to develop these guys. And I think just from my time doing this, I think that's a smart strategy.
All right. That's Charles Power. He's On3's director of scouting and rankings. Charles, thank you so much for your time, man. A lot of great insight here. I'm sure we'll connect with you again at some point. Again, I want to remind people that you can use that promo code UM1 to get 2 months of premium access to the Wolverine.com and the On3 network for only $1 for your first go round, your first sign up, and all that info is in the description below. Charles, thank you so much for your time. Thank you guys for listening. I'm Anthony Broom. We will talk to you again next time.